Hey folks, welcome to a podcast about Catholic things. This is Eric, the ambassador of common sense, and I'm here with
Dan, the ambassador of nonsense. Welcome, everyone.
And today we are talking about not a controversial subject, but I guess it is for some people.
Some people, take controversy with it.
I think Jehovah's Witnesses, Messianic
Seventh-day
Jews,
Adventists,
and Seventh-day Adventists. Which, those are the Mormons, aren't they?
No.
Is there
the Mormons are Latter-day Saints?
Oh, yeah.
Different.
Okay, Latter-day.
Yeah.
But I think Mormons observe Sabbath on Saturday also.
Oh, do they?
For some reason, I thought they did, but maybe I'm wrong.
My son has been trying to convert some Mormons. Actually, they think they're trying to convert him, but...
Yeah.
I said, at some point you might owe it to them to just say, guys, I'm not going to become Mormon. Because he's he's following their official, they meet every so often and they go through lessons with him and stuff. And what he's always doing is researching to come up with the questions he can ask to sort of clue them in about how silly some of their stuff is.
Oh. I had a group, I'll get a group of Jehovah's Witnesses every now and then. One will show up and say, well, can I ask you some questions or can I talk to you? And I'll be like, yeah, come on back. And
yep.
And then they'll come back
sit down and have some coffee.
They'll give their spew, and I just answer them or ask questions. And
right.
A lot of times they'll say, well, can I come back with someone? And so I guess they think, I need the big dogs. And so they come back with a higher up, I guess, or maybe some kind of mentor. And then they might try one or two times that way, and then finally they just stop coming back.
Yeah, yeah.
But I had one group bring 4 people once.
Wow. They're ganging up on you.
Yeah, they thought they would, if we have enough people, we can somehow overcome the Catholic argument.
Well, I think those Jehovah's Witnesses must be, they must have a group there in your area because I remember Aunt Berta and Grandma used to always have those Watchtower magazines that, they were just too polite not to accept. That's the Jehovah's Witnesses, right?
No, but this was in E-Town.
Oh, not at where you are now. Okay.
Do you know I've never had one come here?
But that's funny.
Teresa said she had them all the time. They would all pretend not to be home or whatever.
Well, you know what? Maybe as soon as they find out that Teresa's not there anymore and it's somebody new.
Yeah, they're trying to find
let's
her
go check them out.
In Westchester now. And I don't know. Maybe they know who I am because that group of 4 came back in E-Town.
Maybe it's it's him.
I couldn't actually talk to him that day. I was in the middle of, I had the forge going and I was making a tomahawk out of a railroad spike. And so they showed up. I saw someone was there and I walked out. Yeah, I was
here, you can walk with me. I've got some work to do.
I said, you can talk while I'm working, but and
they're standing around thinking, who the heck is this guy?
Yeah, so they left and never came back after that.
Probably thought you were making some kind of subtle threat or something.
Yeah, which I wasn't. I was in the middle of work.
You made all of us one of those.
Jeez. Yeah. So it was, but they never came back after that, and I've never seen one here at this house, and we've been here for 2 or 3 years now.
Well, yeah. Well, when I was in Shelbyville, I would see the Mormons walking around. They walk around in pairs, and they take this is kind of like part of their, I think, part of their process. That how as Catholics we have a sacramental process, and at certain ages you different things, and you got,
Yeah.
finally you got confession and that kind of stuff. And I think this is kind of one of theirs, that they have to walk around and knock on doors and do door-to-door, proselytizing like that. And because it was young men that I saw, and they were dressed in their suits, and they had those backpack water bottles with the little, sippy thing over the shoulder, and they would be walking around.
So gay.
So they came to my door and was like, yeah, come on in, I'll pour some coffee. Well, it's kind of a joke because Mormons aren't allowed to drink caffeine drinks.
Really?
And, you didn't know that?
No, I didn't know that.
That's one of the things.
Stinks.
It's now a guy who I knew and was, I was pretty good friends with him, when I worked up there in Westchester. Well, it wasn't in Westchester that I worked, but I lived there while I worked there. But he said that the coffee or caffeine, tobacco, and there's something else that they're not allowed to have. He said it's not that the way he explained it is that those particular substances aren't somehow like intrinsically evil, before God or anything like that. Mm-hmm. It's just that those are the things that God calls them to do to set themselves aside and apart from the rest of society, which the Jews, before Christianity had certain things that were like that as well, that God asked them to do, that like pork, for example, isn't inherently unclean, but God asked them, okay, you guys stay away from pork. And that was one of the ways that it set them aside, as a people, which kind of almost brings us to our topic, doesn't it? Yeah.
So God asked the Jews, but God asked everyone. I mean, it was part of the 10 Commandments.
That's an interesting thing, because I was reflecting on that.
Yeah.
It kind of is, the third commandment is kind of a hinge between the moral law that applies to everybody and the Jewish ritual law. Because it's a moral law that you have to take a regular schedule for yourself. It's like Jesus said, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And so it's part of the natural law and therefore the moral law that you have to set aside time to focus on your Creator and your relationship with Him, and to worship, or whatever that might mean in any kind of context. To say, I'm going to put aside the daily concerns of work and so forth, and engage in worship. And even aside from the worship, just the rest aspect. I'm going to rest from doing labor on a schedule, so some kind of, regular periodic schedule. Well, the fact that it's 7 days may or may not be part of the natural law, but if you say, well, every 35 days we're going to take a day of rest, that's obviously not going to be real useful. On the other hand, if you say, well, we're going to do it every, third day, it's going to be a day of rest, you're getting kind of silly. So somewhere around 7 seems right and fitting, whether it's strictly part of the natural law that it's exactly 7, but some kind of period. And once you establish that it is specifically 7, whether that particular day of rest, links up particularly with, the Jewish calendar of Sabbath that corresponded to the 7th day of the week according to their reckoning, from the time when God started commanding that they would work for 6 days and rest on the 7th. That's the Jewish ritual aspect of it. That even if you get 7 out of the moral law, the fact that it's this particular day out of the 7, well, that's ritualistic. That's, what God was calling the Jews to do. And yet it is in the 10 Commandments. So that's why I kind of think of that commandment as this hinge.
Get is, so, okay, because it's in the 10 Commandments, we can see that from a very early on, the Jews recognized as a week as divided into 7 days.
Yes.
Which, I mean, we call it a week, but it could be called anything. It's just that they recognized there were 7 days.
A 7-day cycle, yeah.
That would somehow fit into the calendar. Now, what you called the first day and the second and the sixth or the seventh, I mean, that's kind of arbitrary. I could say my week starts on Wednesday.
Oh, yeah. And, and
it's
so
like,
it was, right. And it wasn't,
so it was up to a Jewish...
know if they had names for the days. They just had, they knew it as the seventh day. And it was the seventh day because on the one hand, God commanded on the seventh day, you know, the labor came first and the rest came after.
Yeah.
And in the one place where God gives it as a commandment, he gives it in relation to bringing them out of the land of Egypt. And in the other place, he gives it in relation to him completing the work of creating the world in 6 days.
Yeah.
And then stopping on the seventh.
But can you...
So, yeah. Go ahead.
There's no way to say that as the Jews came out of Egypt, okay, let's even say after they arrived at the Promised Land, however many thousands of years ago that is, you couldn't take 7 days and go back in groups of 7 until you get to that time period and say it was definitely Sunday or Saturday that they were not laboring. You know what I mean? The calendar has changed several times since then, and it's like, it's not the same Sabbath. It's not.
But I don't think
people who are sticklers about this, as if there's a God-appointed seventh day, and that's just silly.
But I think that for the Jews, it probably does harken back, because that's even when they were in their exiles, after they were dispersed from the Promised Land because they wouldn't, they worshipped idols and all kinds of stuff and sacrificed their children to Moloch and everything. And so God dispersed them to Babylon and Assyria and all those places. Well, even there were those who remained faithful. And one of the things that no matter where they went always set them apart was their refusal to work on the seventh day. And they maintained that strict 6 days and then rest and 6 days and then rest cycle. And I would be willing to bet that the Jewish Sabbath today, Saturday, actually does week for week, 7 day to 7 day match up all the way back to the time of Christ. Now, I don't know if anybody's done any scholarly work on that. I would be really interested to see that because I never thought of that before.
I've always thought about that. When people say, well, it's not it's like, how do you know it's the seventh day? How do you know that Saturday is the seventh day? Maybe.
Yeah. How do you know that your seventh day
at some point
is
they
the
decided
same as
to change calendars,
day.
Right? They're not using the exact same calendar.
Yeah, but I thought when they did that, they did it in a way that.
And what about leap years? They didn't have a leap year.
No, but I think they did it in a way that kept the weeks synchronized. In other words, I don't think they interrupted the 7 day cycle to change the calendar.
They're not synchronized.
What do you mean? I don't think.
When was leap year introduced? That introduces with one other day.
I know, but it doesn't introduce a new day in the weekly cycle. In other words, let's assume they had the days of the weeks. Thursday always followed Wednesday. I don't think they ever introduced and said, okay, everybody, get ready. We're going to skip a day and it's going to be Friday after Wednesday this once or anything like that.
Well, it's a possibility, but it's certainly not a possibility.
I would
definite
like to see
thing.
Work on that. I wonder if anybody's researched that.
I've always wondered that, and I've always thought the seventh day could be arbitrary. It's whatever day you decide is the seventh day.
Yeah.
Or people who are in charge of things like calendars, it's what they decide. So whether you want to say we rest on the first day or the seventh day, kind of doesn't matter. The point is that it's one day out of every week.
Yes, in terms of the moral law. Yeah. And to that degree, the Jewish identification of the seventh day, or even not just the identification of a seventh day, but the idea that it's the seventh day is somewhat arbitrary to the Jews. It's ritualistic for them, and it's commanded by God to be that way, and God relates it to his creation of the world and all of that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But it's that aspect of it is a ritualistic aspect rather than a natural law moral aspect. And it's that way for the church too. The fact that we take Sundays and make them special, we do it for good reasons. Christ rose on a Sunday. The Holy Spirit came to the apostles on a Sunday. The Sunday, the first day, we call it the first day because it's the first day of the new creation. And when Christ rose, that's when we say he came into his rest, the very rest that represents the covenant rest that God offers, sort of prefigures in the Sabbath, but then is complete now rather than being in the Sabbath, it's complete in Christ and his new creation. So, but even then, that idea that, we're going to take the first day and that's going to be our day, that's a somewhat arbitrary but ritual aspect now established by the church rather than by the Jewish law aspect of it. Whereas, like you said, the routine of it, the periodicity of it, that's the moral law. Of
course, the 7 days is really 1/4 of a moon of a lunar cycle. So there is it's that like part
4 times per moon and stuff like that.
There is a natural phenomenon that goes with it.
A cadence that it makes sense.
And I, as far as I know, it's been that way as far back as we can go. It's not like we would have lost a day there.
Right.
As far as I know.
Well, but the lunar cycle, even the lunar cycle though, we say, okay, it's 28 days, but it's not, I don't think it's perfectly that to the hour. I think even the lunar cycle slides, somewhat. So that, a full moon is not always on the same day of the week, for example. Where it would be if it was perfectly 28 days per lunar cycle.
I'm going to look that up.
If you're going to prove me wrong, that would be very interesting.
Lasts slightly over 27 days. Okay, you're right.
But still,
it isn't, it's not exactly.
But it's close enough, like you said, to establish it as a natural cadence.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so.
Anyway.
You know what? I don't even know. Okay, we started with God commanding. He does it in several different ways. As the commandment, he says, remember to keep the Sabbath day holy. 6 days you'll labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath. You shall not do any work, or your servants, or anyone, any foreigners in your towns. And then it harkens back to the 6 days that God labored on the universe and then rested on the Sabbath day. That is in Exodus. Mm-hmm. And it's mentioned in Genesis, but not as a Sabbath. It just says that he rested on the 7th day. It's mentioned in Deuteronomy again as the commandment.
In fact, in Exodus, is where, if I'm not mistaken, he actually ties it to the manna that he sends down. So because he tells them only gather 1 day's worth of manna at a time, but on the 6th day gather 2 days worth of manna, because you're not going to get any on the 7th day because that's a day of rest.
So Exodus 16 is the manna, and Exodus 20 is the 10 Commandments. So it's before he's even given them the commandments that he says he's going to he tells people not to gather on the 7th day.
Right. I think of it as the proto-commandment, because he gives that before he gives any other commandments.
Yeah. Okay. And then, look, God creates everyone. He creates them perfectly. We screw it up. And so he makes this covenant and he starts it by making it with the Jews. He's going to save mankind through the Jewish people. And so he does it. We have the new Adam, Jesus Christ, who is here to kind of cleanse us, or at least make it so that we can escape damnation. And it's considered the new creation. We went through this already, but we were doing it in passing when we were talking about different things. But that is the new creation of mankind. It's the salvation of mankind. So there would be a new day of rest, because that's when Jesus rose, and he's no longer in hell leading people out of hell.
Right. And his resurrection is, in a sense, the completion of the work of salvation. It's as though, because think of the original creation of Adam in the garden. There was no, even though in a sense the natural law existed, there was no concept or use for even the idea of a Sabbath before the fall. Everything Adam and Eve needed were in the garden. They could get anything they needed, and it would have been that way for all mankind throughout the entire earth as they multiplied. Everything, the whole, all of their life was the rest that God intended them to have for all eternity. Well, they lost that, and that's where the need for the third commandment and the Sabbath came into play. Now, Christ brings forth the new creation, and it is our eternal rest. We don't experience it eternally until we leave this earth, but it's the covenanted rest that God promises, that the Sabbath foreshadows in Christ as a new creation. And this new creation, just like the original creation, was itself a rest. And so we rest on the day of the new creation, the first day. And that's our day of rest, to commemorate Christ's new creation by rising from the dead.
And if you really want
And then later, when the Holy Spirit came to the apostles on a Sunday, giving birth to the church.
And if you're stuck on that seventh day, you could just rearrange your calendar a little bit, and you can just call Sunday the seventh day.
You could. But then you wouldn't be a very good Christian. Because we really do... Well, then you wouldn't be a good Christian, because we really do make Sunday the Lord's Day, because it's the first day. In fact, it's referred to scripturally that way, with reason.
Mm-hmm. When did they begin seeing Sunday as the Sabbath? Or as
first of all, let's clarify that. It's not the Sabbath, because the word Sabbath still refers to the seventh day.
Oh, okay.
And is part of the old law. And so what they did, the apostles, they didn't start calling Sunday the Sabbath. They called it the Lord's Day. This is apostolic. This isn't something that didn't creep up until, 300 AD or something like that. This is apostolic times, in the times of the apostles, as evident in the Bible. They're referring to it as the Lord's Day. And
they did this.
They refer to breaking bread on the Lord's Day.
Where did they do that?
So, for example, I'll give you an example. Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 16. Let's see, 1 to 2. Yeah, at the very beginning of Corinthians. I've got a physical Bible. That's why I'm searching around here.
Oh, okay.
This is just an example. I'll give you another example in a minute. Now concerning the contribution for the saints.
Where is this?
When he's taught. This is Corinthians 16, right at the beginning of 1 Corinthians 16. St. Paul's writing to the Corinthians. And what they're doing is they're collecting from various churches for the poor in Jerusalem. And they refer to them as the saints, but they mean the poor in Jerusalem, the poor Christians in Jerusalem. Now concerning the contribution for the saints, as I directed the churches of Galatia, so you also, because he said the same thing to the Galatians, so you also are to do, which is to collect money. On the first day of every week, each of you is to put something aside and store it up as he may prosper, so that contributions need not be made when I come. So it'll all be there, and then he can come around and gather it. Now, why the first day of the week? Because that's when they're gathering. They would gather in people's houses and break bread. Now, we can see that again, actually earlier in Acts 20. If we look at Acts 27, it's talking about Paul. It says, on the first day of the week, when we were gathered together to break bread, Paul talked with them, intending to depart on the next day.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
yeah,
it's the first day of the week that they gather to break bread. Now, several times it talks about them going into the synagogues, or if they're in Jerusalem, even the temple, on the Sabbath in order to preach. But that's not because that wasn't because they felt like they needed to observe the Sabbath. It was because that's when the Jews were gathered, whom they wanted to convert. And so that's when they would go preach to the Jews. Now, I've got two more, and these are apocryphal. They're not biblical, but they are authoritative in how they indicate the minds of Christians at the time. The first one is the Didache, which is a sort of a compendium of rules for how they live the Christian life. This is around 70 AD, so this is within the lifetimes of some of the apostles. And it says, but every Lord's Day, and the Lord's Day was the first day of the week when Jesus rose, gather yourselves together and break bread, and give thanksgiving after having confessed your transgressions, that your sacrifice, they're sacrificing on the Lord's Day, not on the Sabbath, may be pure, but let no one that is at variance with his fellow come together with you until they be reconciled, that your sacrifice may not be profaned. And of course, they're talking about the sacrifice of the Mass. There's also a letter of Barnabas, the companion of Paul, who traveled with him on some of his mission journeys. And it's kind of interesting how he words it. He says, we keep the 8th day with joyfulness, the day also on which Jesus rose again from the dead. Instead of referring to it as the first day, he refers to it as the 8th day, the day following the Sabbath, which is when God established his new creation. So he's got the old, and he, I think, and it's, again, this is apocryphal, but I think he's doing this because he, along with Paul, would have understood that it's not just, there's a distinction to be drawn between the old creation and the new creation. So by calling it the 8th day, he's showing that there's something prior to it, but that's the old creation that needs to be put away. We're leaving that and we're entering into the new creation. And so that's why we keep the Lord's Day on the, after the Sabbath, on the first day or the 8th day or whatever, when Jesus rose from the dead. So those are some examples showing that it's the first day of the week, what they called the Lord's Day, that people gathered for what they considered their Christian duty. They to break bread. As part of Christian worship.
Sacrifice.
Yeah. Now, there's also a few verses that demonstrate that the observance of the Jewish law, including the Sabbath, was not expected of Christians. Now, they might observe, if they were, for example, converted Jews, they might continue to observe certain aspects of the Jewish rituals, especially in order to place themselves among other Jews that they could then convert or something like that. But it wasn't required, and for Gentiles who would convert, they weren't required to adhere to any aspect of the Jewish ritual code. And we see that in the first council of the church, the Council of Jerusalem. If you remember, some of the Gentiles who were converting were being told by local Jewish priests who had also converted to Christianity, hey, if you want to be saved, yes, you have to come believe in Jesus Christ, but you also got to be circumcised and start observing the Jewish law as well. And so this was becoming a concern, and so the apostles met at Jerusalem, and James, who was he was the apostle of Jerusalem. And so if he was hosting the council, so to speak. So he kind of spoke on behalf of the rest of them. He says, therefore my judgment, after he kind of summed up what everybody said, my judgment is that we should not trouble those of the Gentiles who turn to God, but should write to them to abstain from the pollutions of idols, and from unchastity, and from what is strangled, and from blood. 4 things. That's all they were going to demand of them. And 3 of them had to do with idols. And so even though idols are nothing, or they're demons, but even though, the sacrifice to idols, it's like the angel told Peter in the dream, whatever God has made, don't let yourself consider that unclean. But they're still being told, hey, stay away from the stuff that's sacrificed to idols. And the reason they're doing that is so that they don't give some kind of scandal and make it look to other Christians like it's okay to participate in that idol worship. So consuming the animal, would have been a part of the idol worship. And so they say, okay, stay away from that altogether. Other than that, behave sexually, stay away from unchastity. And that's all we're going to burden you with in terms of rules right now. So that's the one thing. Then in Romans,
but wait a minute,
Paul's
he
writing,
says not eating strangled animals.
Because if you remember in the old Jewish law, one of the things that God was very strict about was that when you sacrificed an animal, you had to slice it open and let all the blood drain out. Yeah. And then you had the blood, you could never consume the blood because you would burn the animal and then the parts of it that were left, you would consume them, but you were never allowed to consume the blood. And so the blood, you had to strangle the animal. Sometimes you catch the blood. Sometimes you had to sprinkle the blood on the altar. Sometimes you had to sprinkle the blood on people. Sometimes for certain kinds of consecrations, you would put the blood on their foreheads and their toes and stuff like that. I mean, there was all kinds of crazy stuff they did with blood, but the one thing you were not allowed to do was drink the blood of the animal. And a lot of the people around that area who engaged in idol worship, one of the things that they would do is strangle the animal to kill it for the idol sacrifice so that they could preserve the blood and drink the blood as part of their idol worship.
Okay.
And that's why the early Christians, even the Gentiles, they say, okay, get away from that drinking blood stuff. Don't do that anymore if you were ever doing that.
Okay, so it's a matter of association more than any kind of law
something
from God.
Specific about blood. Yeah, like these days, I mean, if you like blood pudding, I can't imagine who would like blood pudding, but if you liked blood pudding, you could you could eat it.
Yeah. Okay. If you really want to drink blood, you can drink blood.
You can yeah. You're probably sick if you
maybe weird,
you should see a psychiatrist or something, but yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so Paul is writing to the Romans, and I have to admit this is kind of weak because there's some other ways to interpret this, but he writes, one man esteems one day as better than another, while another man esteems all days alike. Let everyone be fully convinced in his own mind. He who observes one day observes it in honor of the Lord. He who eats, eats in honor of the Lord, since he gives thanks to God, while he who abstains, abstains in honor of the Lord and gives thanks to God. He's trying to tell them, look, you're all brothers in Christ. Stop trying to place over each other your own concept of how you need to live that.
Yeah.
In terms of rituals. He's not talking about morality now. He's talking about rituals. And that's why he's saying, okay, one person might say, this is the day to honor the Lord. Somebody else might say, okay, all the days are alike. But in any case, he's saying, he's strictly telling them, don't impose the Jewish law or the Sabbath on each other.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, the last one I have, which is even a little stronger, is the letter to the Colossians in chapter 2, around verse 15, 16 or so. He says, chapter 2, verse 16, "Therefore, let no one pass judgment on you in questions of food and drink, or with regard to a festival or a new moon or a Sabbath." So in other words, he's writing to them and saying, look, don't let anyone, the Jews, the Jewish priests, or anyone, tell you that you have to follow the Jewish rituals. You are now part of the new creation in Christ, not part of the old law. You're not subject to the old law anymore.
Yeah, there was this huge, it's obvious in the gospel, one of the things that Jesus is having to deal with is they've got billions of these tiny little laws set up, and it's like, if you don't do this, then you're not holy. And it kind of didn't matter what someone thought or what else they did, as long as they followed these little laws. And it's something Jesus had to fight, even though he did keep the laws. And then, so it's really one of the first battles that the apostles had to fight, is saying, look, these old tiny little laws, which are, people complain about the Catholic laws, and it's it's nothing compared to what they'd had to do. And it's one of the first battles they had to fight. Don't get caught up in all these tiny little things. Now, of course, you still have to make laws, and you still have to, days of fast and things like that. There's nothing wrong with the church having a day
the
of
whole
fasting.
idea of a communal rhythm of life and a cadence. That's why we've got the liturgical seasons and everything. But there were actually two levels of these laws. There was, first of all, the authentic Jewish ritual law, which is the law of Moses, that included a lot of rituals that even up until Jesus' time, God expected the Jews to follow. But then there were the Pharisees and others within the Jewish priesthood who would take these laws and interpret them. So, for example, the law says you shall not work on the Sabbath. And it goes into a little bit of detail. Well, the Pharisees took that and said, okay, well, we got to draw the lines and let you know exactly when you're working and when you're not. So, for example, you can't help a poor person or like a sick person or something like that. And you can't walk more than X number of steps on the Sabbath. In fact, that's, there's a reference, I think it's when the apostles are watching Jesus, ascend into heaven, and then they're going to head back into town, and it says it was a Sabbath day's journey. What they mean is it was it was close enough that you could walk that far and still not break the Pharisaical interpretation of the Sabbath in terms of how many steps you're allowed to take. But nowhere in the law of Moses did it refer to a number of steps. These were people interpreting the law of Moses, and often coming up with interpretations for the sake of allowing them to take advantage of the people and to exercise power over the people. And that's why, like when Jesus' apostles were grinding wheat, seeds, between their fingers in order to eat them, and they got after them for doing work. And, Jesus said, hey, the Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. It's like, hey, don't talk to me about the Sabbath.
You want.
So,
and then, at this time in the church, it's not that they had not come together. Okay, making laws to say, all right, we need to fast and things like that. It is something that the church has to do. At this time, they hadn't come up with any kind of law whatsoever.
It was just practices, standard things. Hey, Jesus rose from the dead. Of course it's natural. We're going to meet and break bread on this day.
Right.
And I mean, the laws such that they did have were admonitions like, hey, make sure that you examine your consciences and your hearts and confess your sins before you go and break bread so that you can be pure.
And eventually,
obviously,
they did come up with
confession.
Say days of fasting.
Mm-hmm.
But even when they came up with when the Catholic Church looks at something like a day of fasting, it's not to us like, it's not God's commandment that we fast on Fridays.
Oh, right.
We don't understand it as, inherently evil to eat meat on Fridays. It's just a law passed by man, and we understand it as a man's law. I think that's one thing that non-Catholics don't quite get. We don't think that it's God's law it used to be fast on Fridays, now it's just abstain from meat. We don't think God commanded us to abstain from meat on Fridays. We understand that as the law of the church, not as the law of God.
Right. Now, we submit to it in filial obedience, the church being the bride of Christ and the body of Christ. We see it as a good thing that the Holy Spirit inspires the church to command in order to build up the graces of participation in the merits of the cross and so on and so forth. I mean, there's a whole lot of theology behind even little things like that you can dig into. But no, that we don't see it as some kind of divine, divinely ordained aspect of how the universe works, that on Fridays we got to not eat meat or something like that.
Yeah. I was just clarifying that because we were getting into the fact that we were telling Jews, hey, you don't have to follow these old laws. They're not the laws anymore because they're not the lawmakers. We have a new set of lawmakers, and as of yet, they hadn't really given us any laws.
Yeah.
Eventually they would.
St. Paul, again and again, says the law of love in Jesus, and, uses words like that.
Mm-hmm. So, okay. So when did it become official?
That's a good question.
I mean, it was something they always did, right?
It was something that they sort of just did. It was something that they were, not in the sense of, they were instructed to do, even by the apostles, even though it was, you would, if you think of instruction as something a little bit less, than commanded, like today, it's one of the commandments of the church that we have to observe Sunday and as a holy day and so on and so forth. But it was clearly part of the instruction of the apostles. When it became an actual law or rule of the church, I don't know. I've seen reference to one of the councils in 325 AD or something like that.
Yeah.
It was within the first few centuries. It's not something that, this didn't actually become a thing until, the Middle Ages or something like it. It wasn't like that.
You see weird arguments from Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons, not the Mormons, the Latter-day Saints, that that Christians have always celebrated the Sabbath and not Sunday, the Lord's Day. And
up until when?
It's kind of a weird... I mean, how do you argue when someone says, okay, for centuries and millennia, people have, God's real church have kept the Sabbath and not the Lord's Day. And they always saw that as Saturday. And it's like, well, it's just something they always did. And they might find one kind of obscure, text from some guy in the 8th century who wrote it. But what do you say when all of the literature points to us following the Lord's Day, not the Sabbath? And I never know. You can't prove a negative. You can't prove that people didn't. They make it really difficult to even have anything to say to it.
The more there is a kind of a sort of negative proof or a proof by lack that you can engage in for things like that. So you take a claim like that. Let's say, okay, fine. Let's assume you're right. For centuries after the coming of Christ, the Christian church observed the Sabbath and not a Sunday. And so today it's very clear that we all observe Sunday. At some point there had to be a transition, and this transition was universal. Well, anytime the church deals with a change like that, it's controversial within the church, and it generates documents and arguments and that kind of stuff. And anybody who's making that claim ought to be able to point to a period and say, look, here's where they were dealing with that question and where the old rule got overturned and the new rule got instituted. And the fact that they can't, I mean, there is no such period in the church's history.
Right.
Kind of demonstrates, like I said, in a negative way, that the claim itself just isn't true. It doesn't hold any water.
That's a good point. Okay. Do we have anything else on that subject? I don't.
I don't think we do. I mean, the catechism itself gives a good summary of what we talked about in terms of the reasons why Sunday, works for Christians, why it's fitting for Christians to worship on Sunday. But I think we've kind of exhausted all of the demonstrations of first of all, that even the apostles considered it their right to change this. And even though it's part of the Ten Commandments, there's a moral component, but the selection of the particular day was clearly considered part of the law, the ritual law that could be done away with. The fact that the earliest Christians considered the first day, not the Sabbath, not the last day, to be the special day for them to meet and worship, break bread. I don't know that there's much else to say about it at this point.
Okay.
So
I guess we will move on to news then. So did you hear about this plane crash in Mississippi?
No.
I guess a plane just
large plane or
crashed
small, like
into a house.
Plane?
No, it was a small plane.
Okay, like a crop duster.
Killed 4 people.
Wow.
It was a small plane and it crashed. It doesn't say what made it crash, but people from around there are saying, well, the weather was terrible. There's no way a plane should have been flying around at that time.
Oh, okay. Wow. No, I didn't hear about that. Was anyone hurt? I mean, I'm assuming the pilot of the plane was killed. Was anyone hurt in the house?
All it says is that there are 4 fatalities, and so far they're not saying whether it was people in the home or people on the plane.
Okay. Well, yeah, interesting, tragic.
So, yeah. Let's see. So, Facebook Oversight Board upholds the ban on President Donald Trump. However, it calls for a review in 6 months. So they're going to keep the ban on Donald Trump, but they're going to review their decision in 6 months. We need to find a way around it.
I should include it as a nonsense news. The mere fact that there is something called a Facebook Overview Board. The very existence of such a board is so stupid and nonsensical and farcical.
Yeah, and someday we need to do a show about these kinds of things. The censorship that's coming from Facebook and Twitter, and because I still every now and then hear dumb arguments like, well, this is a private company. They're allowed to ban someone if they want to ban something. And it's just, that's not the way it is anymore. But, on the one hand, you would say it's almost become like a government agency in that it has an oversight board that sits around and has meetings about things they have no business having meetings about. On the other hand, the Facebook Oversight Board is really just it's
a bunch of...
It's just for show.
It's a bunch of callow youths flexing their muscle with a bunch of newfound power that they don't know how to handle because they haven't lived long enough to acquire any wisdom.
Yeah. But ultimately, there's only one or two guys who actually make the decision to ban Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And the board is nothing but a bunch of people who clap for them when they make the decision.
And,
that's all it is.
Thumbs up. Yeah, way to go.
So, and I guess that way the blame is spread on the board instead of the CEO or other people who are actually in charge. But
we really ought to do a episode on the, the big tech problem. I agree it's a problem. I am much more friendly than I think you are to the argument of, as a private company, they get to make the rules about their own, the use of their own service. But at the, I recognize the problems in that kind of response. We ought to have a discussion about that, and there will be some points of view that we'll disagree on. But I think by talking those out, it may be valuable. Maybe we can come up with some decent insights on some of this stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's make a point to do that.
Sometime in the next couple of weeks.
In the next week or two.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. The SpaceX Starship SN-15 makes its first successful vertical landing.
Wow.
Which it launched from Boca China, Texas, and it climbed to a height of 10 kilometers.
Okay. Is that considered
and then
space?
Came back down and landed vertical.
Landed vertically, so they didn't need a runway.
Right.
I mean, this is like space. This is sci-fi stuff, guys. I mean,
this is like.
I mean, those of you who may not be able to appreciate this, but I mean, this is like watching Star Trek and stuff, like a shuttle landing.
Right. Yeah, it's
this
neat.
is really
neat.
Cool stuff.
So, speaking of space, a China rocket. Let's see, it would be Long March 5B Y2 rocket.
Okay.
This is the main rocket for a specific. The payload was the main component of their new space station that they're building.
Wait.
So
China's
it goes
building
up.
One and Russia's building one?
Yeah. China's building a space station.
And Russia's building one too.
Yeah. Only China's further along on it, I think. So they plan to have one by 2022.
Wow, that's fast. That's like now.
So they get their main thrust rocket doesn't detach until it's up in space.
Oh, wow.
In orbit. Now, usually when that happens, you should have some kind of control so that once it starts its re-entry, it would go, say, in an ocean or something. But this was unmanned, or it was uncontrolled. It was out of control re-entry. It ended up in the Indian Ocean, but it didn't have to. It could have landed anywhere. And it did actually, a lot of it burnt up, but not all of it. And it apparently China's kind of famous for doing this. They're not controlling their re-entries.
Okay. Yeah, this is Chinese math. It's like, okay, 3/4 of the world is ocean anyway. We've got a 75% of a safe crash down. Let's just drop it and, hope for the best.
And if it happens to land on, say, an island, what's the big deal? I mean, what are they going to do? Area. It's not like America. I mean, the odds of it actually landing in America are slim. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, they're building this thing and they're just letting their giant payloads or their rockets come down.
The fact that they're building a space station, I didn't realize that. This should bother a lot of people.
Yeah, it should.
And in fact, this is exactly the kind of thing. This is where Biden needs to get out of the way and hand Trump the presidency back and say, okay, you were the better man for the job. You should take over. And Trump should start working again and accelerate his has plans and ideas for a space force.
Yeah.
And really develop it, because back, I forget when it was exactly, but there was a treaty that the various industrial nations all signed on to. And my understanding is that everybody relevant to it signed on to it except for China, basically saying, okay, because communications is so critical for a civilized world, we're all going to agree that satellites are off limits as targets of military weaponry.
Yeah.
We're not allowed to take down each other's satellites. We can bomb each other's military bases and so on and so forth here on the ground, but not the satellites. China is, my understanding is that China was the one nation that would not agree to that. Would not sign on to that treaty. So the fact that they're building their own space station, I think
ought to scare the hell out of us.
Yeah, I think a real space force, a military space force, is quite relevant right now as something that America needs.
But we've got some doddering old fool who's supposedly the president, but who's really running things is China.
Space in his head than there is
people
in the solar system.
Yeah, everyone's going crazy. So, let's see. So, yeah, have you ever heard of LiveLeak? It's kind of a YouTube station, only
like
it's completely uncensored. Well, it's
uncensored
like
in
YouTube.
the sense that like YouTube, but uncensored. So like uncensored, so that you can like say outrageous things, or uncensored like they got porn and everything.
You know what? I don't even
both.
know if it's got pornography or not. But it does have like when ISIL would execute people.
That's where they would put their videos.
That's what they would use. And so it's uncensored in that sense. I don't know if there's a porn. I don't know if I imagine pornography is on there, but I don't know.
Never heard of so LiveLeak.
LiveLeak. I remember when what was it, the Vegas shooting? Mm-hmm. Do you remember that? There was that guy like
going around from nightclub. Oh no, the guy who went into
he was in a hotel just shooting at these. No, the guy who was in a hotel. I don't know. The guy who was in a hotel shooting down on a crowd of people at a concert, was that in Vegas?
You know what? When we can't remember which shootings took place where, there are far too many mass shootings.
That's sad, yeah.
We need to encourage citizens to pack. These things would be cut down if people would just
hit
carry
like 60-something people. It was a huge
one. Oh, man. Wow. No,
but anyway, right after that, I thought, I was looking for videos. There's hundreds of people, thousands of people there, so there's got to be a bunch of videos out there. But I kept seeing the same 4 videos over and over again. So I ended up on, I think, LiveLeak. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I started looking at those videos, and it actually showed a dead person on that video, and it was really disturbing. It was very disturbing, to the point where I got off of LiveLeak and I wouldn't go back. But that's the kind of things LiveLeak would have. So generally, all those people in those crowds were filming that same event, and probably a lot of those videos were pretty bad. YouTube cut them all out, except for 4 or 5 videos. LiveLeak had those videos.
Oh, okay. By the way, I just typed it into Google, and I'm reading internet headlines that say that LiveLeak is dead.
Yeah. Okay. So they've shut down.
Oh, was that the news?
That's the news. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
After 15 years, they shut down. Some people think they got paid off. But I don't know. You never know with these things. But it was a non-censored video site, and it's
most of the headlines about it seem to bill it as the uncensored aspect of it is mostly oriented around gore and violence, stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, okay. All right.
So let's see. There's that pipeline. The Colonial Pipeline apparently got hit with a cyber attack, shutting it down. This pipeline feeds 45% of the East Coast fuel. And
so, okay, this is something that I haven't bothered to go look up. Is this a pipeline carrying gasoline from a refinery to like a distribution center, or is it carrying oil to a refinery?
I think it carries gasoline.
Okay.
You know what?
To a distribution center where then tankers would take it to the various gas stations and stuff like that. Because I was wondering, because when people started talking about, fill up now, it's like, okay, a pipeline, there's a delay between refinery and gas station.
Yeah, a big delay.
Why is everybody panicking?
It might not come at all.
So, have you found anything about when it, what the long-term effect is going to be? When's it going to be back up? That kind of stuff?
No, I didn't. But look, this stuff happens, and then everybody goes nuts.
Yeah.
And then they use, so everybody decides I need to fill up my car right now. So there's this huge line to the gas stations, and obviously the gas station only has so much gasoline, so they run out of gas. So then they report it, hey, they're out of gasoline in Virginia. And then everybody goes and gets more gasoline. And this happens over and over again. And I don't understand why people let themselves get worked up by this.
More harm is caused by the panic than is caused by the original situation. It's exactly what happened with COVID.
Yeah, definitely. And it happened, I remember in 9/11. I'm trying to get home from Indianapolis, and I needed gas, I only had a quarter of a tank left, and I pull over, and I couldn't get gas anywhere. I just barely made it home.
Yeah.
But people act stupid. And it's like, okay, let's say gasoline was cut off. Let's say that's all the gasoline the whole eastern coast is going to have from here on in.
For
that one extra tank, how much is that really going to help you?
Yeah, is that going to help anyone? Now, I also want to say something about this. So let's take your situation. One of the things that you often see when there's panics like this is that, and I think a lot of states have laws that prevent this now, but a couple times in the past, gas station owners, they'd be like, whoa, boy, there's a gas panic. I'm going to triple the price of gas.
Yeah, I saw
Everybody gets down on them. But here's the thing. If all the gas stations, let's say 9/11 happened and all the gas stations in Indiana had tripled, quadrupled the price of gas, you are needing to get home and you did barely make it, but you might not have made it.
Yeah.
But you're going to a gas station, and because the gas is 4 times more expensive, let's say it's $10 a gallon now, or $15 a gallon, it's like, well, okay, it's $15 a gallon. To get just 2 gallons, I need to spend $30, but those 2 gallons are going to make the difference to me getting home or not.
Yeah.
Versus having to leave my car on the road. You'd be happy to pay that.
Yeah, I would.
And people get so down on these gas stations for gouging. They use the word gouging. But
this is
it actually
simple economics.
Makes sense, and it helps. It
this
helps
is supply
in the
and
long
demand.
term. Exactly. And it helps make sure that it's there for the people who really need it.
Yeah. So, I mean, and they... The thing is, if you had a gas station, you decide, well, I'm just going to raise the price, people are down on it to the point where a lot of the people who saw that price go up will never go to you again. But it's like, so you can't do it. If you're a gas station, you really can't do it because it's going to hurt. Because that gas shortage is not going to last. It's not a real shortage anyway. And you have to somehow convince these people to keep using your gas station. So you can't do it. But it's dumb because the same people who are sitting in line just to fill up their cars, they're the ones causing the problem.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. Yeah, I know. I don't see anything wrong with gouging, as they call it. It's just it's economics 101.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Vicky told me a story where some lady filled up a plastic bag with gasoline. Tried to fill a plastic
that's going to melt.
It was leaking everywhere, but she tied the bag and put it in the back of her car and drove off.
You know what? By the time she got home, she just had a gasoline-soaked car. Yeah. Gasoline melts plastic.
People are dumb.
Oh gosh.
Okay, so get this. I don't know about that. Okay, this bugs me. So the whole genome study confirms the existence of 4 distinct species of giraffes.
Okay.
Corroborating the conclusions of a 2016 DNA study. So, at one time, people thought giraffes were all a single species. Now they're saying there's 4 species.
Distinct species.
And 7 subspecies. But
that you can only identify through genomic analysis?
Yeah, I don't agree with classifying species that way.
Me neither.
Because that's how they come up with saying, well, there's 2 different species of birds, and this is part of the whole evolution problem, is that they call something a different species because they can classify it through the DNA. But those 2 animals can still mate, and that means they're not a different species.
Or even
now, they don't mate naturally in the wild, maybe, but they're not, a horse is still a horse.
If they can come up with like a differentiating, like, these tend to have spots, like how how giraffe spots look.
Yeah.
Well, these have spots that are, tend to be twice as large as those, and that's how we can tell the 2 species apart, or something like that. But if the only thing you're using is the DNA to classify the species,
because I will argue that one species. I do believe somewhat in evolution, but one species has never come out of another species. But then they say, yeah, it did. See right here, these are 2 different species, and it's like, well,
but they're using the
that's just how you're classifying them.
Yeah,
that's not. Yeah. They're not a different species. Those 2 animals, if you took that egg and that sperm, would make another animal. So it's not
only
a
another
species.
Animal. But an animal that could breed with either one of the other 2. Yeah. Yeah, that's the key point. Because like a mule can't breed at all, for example.
Yeah. That's what bothers me about classifying animals with DNA. I don't think it should be done.
I don't think that's valid. But there's a deeper problem there too. If you're gonna use that as a classification, rather than, let's say that it could be that the species of giraffe are only separated by geography, but if you allowed them to live in the same area, they would breed in crossbreed.
Yeah.
Well, then you really don't have that much basis for calling them species if you can't tell the difference by looking at them in some way, But
they do list them. They do look different. Slightly.
Okay.
Not a whole lot different, but
so that would be the basis. But the thing is, that would be like dog breeds, for example. We don't say that even as different as they are, a Pomeranian is not a different species from a Great Pyrenees.
Right.
They're just different breeds. They might
just look
call
different.
them subspecies.
That'd be like calling black people and Chinese people a different species. You can't do that. It's not a different species.
If you're going to identify species just based strictly on DNA analysis, you're going to start calling different humans different species. Groups of humans as different species. But here's the thing. I suspect that there are scientists out in the world today, evolutionary scientists maybe, who really do want to do that. who see that as legitimate science to classify the human race into species. Say, oh, you're part of this species, you're part of that species, to encourage people not to intermix.
You know, the thing is, I mean, it's such a cliche nowadays. You have to follow the science. You have to listen to the science. If you're going to do that, follow it all the way, especially when it's science, because this is not real science. But then take that to the logical conclusion. The logical conclusion is that white people should not be breeding with black people because we're two different species. Yeah, according to this way of doing it.
If you're going to do that, if that's what you're going to call species, then exactly. That's and then you realize, oh, wait a minute, that's not the science I want to follow.
Chesterton, I don't remember what it was from, but I remember reading it a long time ago about the three-toed horse versus the one-toed horse. His point was that it's still a horse. You can't call it something different. It's still a horse, and a horse is a horse. And it may have evolved as a horse, but it's still a horse. It's still the same animal it was in the beginning. Mm-hmm. And so are giraffes.
Right.
And a giraffe is not a dog or a parrot or anything else. It's a giraffe, and that's one species. But, okay, so whoever's controlling the way we classify animals nowadays into different species is able to do it just with DNA, and that's how they do it nowadays. And that's why they're able to say all these different species came out of one species. But it's really, as far as I'm concerned, all the same species.
They're just, a species.
This is a created argument for evolution, because the real argument for macroevolution just isn't there. Mm-hmm. And it never will be. And classifying these as different species will not make it there. Right. Oh well. That's another one we've never talked about on a full show.
Sometime. Mm-hmm.
So President Biden declares a state of emergency because of the gas and stuff. I don't even know what that means. I'm not even going to call that.
What a state of emergency? What does that mean?
It means there's long lines at the gas station. Yeah, he's an idiot.
I mean, maybe it means that states could always deploy, like if they needed to deploy the National Guard to keep peace or something like that, make sure people in lines don't start turning violent or something.
Don't need Biden for that.
States could always do that. We don't need the president for that. Maybe it just means that the National Guard can get money from the federal government for those deployments or something.
Yeah, anytime anything happens and somebody says it's a state of emergency, it's got something to do with money. It's like, where money goes and how money gets there.
I think that's all it is it allows money to flow.
So, here's something. I guess there was a Saturday Night Live bit about Dogecoin.
Okay.
And the digital currency, kind of like Bitcoin, but not Bitcoin, started to drop. The value of it started to drop.
Okay.
So Elon Musk comes out and announces that his company will accept that currency. But I don't understand what this means.
But
he's saying they will accept it as payment for the Dodge 1 mission to the moon.
Okay, so you can use this cryptocurrency and pay it to Elon Musk's company to buy a ticket on...
But I don't think you're buying a ticket. You can't buy a ticket to the moon.
You can't buy...
I don't understand what he means.
That, hey, we're going to build I thought his project was we're going to build a trip to the moon, and people now could buy advance tickets for it.
Hold on. What? I don't know what he means by his company will accept that cryptocurrency as payment for a Dodge 1 mission to the moon. I don't think you can just buy a seat on... I don't know what he means here. And then he says that they are going to, when they get to the moon, they will have cryptocurrency on that mission. That
okay.
They will deliver
They're
Dodge
launching
1 to the moon.
They're launching a mission to the moon. People can buy payload space. It's not for passengers, but you can buy payload space. Like you want to, okay, wait, I've got an experiment I want to do. I want some instruments taken up and placed on the moon.
Okay.
You can buy payload space for that. They're accepting, is it called Dogecoin or Dogecoin? It's Doge. I would pronounce that
It's
Doge.
Doge. You say, we could call it Doge.
I have no idea.
Okay. Well, anyway.
So he's accepting Dogecoin for payload space on the flight to the moon.
Okay, I think it basically to inflate the price. And then Vicky's saying now that he's saying he won't. No. Okay, they also stopped accepting Bitcoin. I think what all this boils down to is he's trying to compete with Bitcoin. I think that's what this is really about. I don't think it's going to work for him. Because how many people really want to rent space?
Since the name is Dogecoin, it sounds like it's a cryptocurrency that was invented or established by him. Is that right?
I don't know if it was or not. Okay.
No, it was created by an IBM software engineer.
Okay. Well, it's okay. I'll bet he has a bunch of it, and he's trying.
Okay, wait a minute.
Promote it.
Here's Wall Street Journal article: How to say it.
I like calling it Dogecoin. I enjoy that.
Blah blah blah.
Look, it's not going anywhere.
How do you pronounce it? He says the correct pronunciation is Dohj. So would you call that Dodge or Doge? I still don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think it matters.
Dogecoin.
That's another thing we could do a show about is cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and I don't know. Everybody did a show about Bitcoin like a year or two ago, and we didn't because I didn't quite understand it. But finally, I took a Saturday to sit and really look at it and study it, and now that I understand it, I'm not really all that impressed with it.
Me neither. It's like, okay, it's never going to become it's never going to be something that could be a nation's currency.
Right.
It's always going to be this sort of out there esoteric. You'll have a few people who accept it as payment, and so it'll have a little bit of currency value, but mostly it's just going to be out there for people who want to speculate that the exchange rate between it and other currencies is going to go up or down. Yeah, you're right. We should do a show where we actually explain it and what it is and how it works.
Yeah. Okay, so Ukrainian scientists are reporting that, and they don't know why, there's some nuclear radiation increase in the Chernobyl remains.
Oh, really?
And they're not real sure why.
That's interesting.
Yeah, which I don't know. Maybe there was like a some of the fuel maybe hadn't been gotten to yet, hadn't been...
And something decayed and allowed it to start... Yeah.
Yeah. I have a feeling it's something like that. Because they were never honest with us about everything from the very start, so...
That's true. I mean, the whole place is still shrouded in some mystery.
Yeah. There may have been like a whole other room full of junk that they didn't tell us about.
Yeah.
So, that is all I got.
Okay. Well, I have some nonsense news. First of all, it's kind of funny. We were just talking about Elon Musk, and I have
kind of a joke.
Yeah, California Tesla driver is arrested while riding in the back seat. I guess part of the whole Tesla
this like a self-driving car
is they're building some of the cars for some of them are just sort of autopilot. Like you're on the expressway, it's like, okay, I'm just going to be on this. Like if I'm going from Indianapolis to Dayton on I-70, and it's just going to be a bunch of trucks that I'm stuck behind or passing or whatever, and I know I'm not going to have to get off, I'll just put it in autopilot mode and I'll let it, drive itself and manage that for me until I decide that, I want to get off at that exit or something like that. Or I have to go to the bathroom or whatever.
So a guy was doing that and climbed in the back seat.
He decided, well, it could have been that, or I guess Tesla allows a certain number of their customers, like a select few, to actually buy what are called full self-driving cars that I guess maybe navigate even on city streets or whatever. But it's not clear whether this guy's car was the one kind or the other. But apparently he was in the back seat. People were calling 911 to report, hey, there's a guy driving down the highway in the back seat. And the cops flashed their lights, pulled him over. He climbed into the front seat, and they gave him a ticket for reckless driving. Now, he may say, hey, I don't think it's reckless. Tesla's pretty good about this stuff. But Tesla says, if you're going to use these modes, right now they're experimental. You have to be ready to immediately take control back over the car.
Yeah.
So, no, you can't climb into the back seat. And there have been several deaths because of people using these modes and not being ready to take back control of the car.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. It's just that we're not ready for it yet.
Yeah. I mean, for those who are willing
I've seen computers freeze up way too easily.
Yeah, yeah. What operating system are you going to run on your self-driving car computer? Are you going to put Windows on there and?
If you're in the technology business, then you understand that the blue screen of death can come to pretty much any machine, any computer, anywhere. It happens.
That's right.
Even all the expensive Google servers out there, they have a whole bunch of them because now and then some of them go down.
Yeah. All right. So, next. So you ever wonder about those surveys? I don't know if you've ever read old surveys where they'll refer to a tree or something like that.
Hold on.
What?
It's Dog E coin.
Doggy coin?
It's Doggy coin.
Doggy coin. That is
because it's a dog.
Oh,
the logo has a dog.
Oh, okay. I never picked that. I didn't even see the logo. I didn't know it had a logo. Dog E-coin. So it's an E-coin, electronic, but it's doggy coin.
Yeah. Now you know. Doggy coin.
Now you know. Okay, well.
But some people still call it dog coin and Dodge coin and Doge coin.
There's got to be somebody out there who calls it Doge coin.
I think the correct way to say it would be doggy coin.
Doggy coin. Well, that makes the most sense. Okay, got it. And it's probably a dog just like all the other e-coins, so.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you ever wonder about those surveys? If you ever read old land surveys, if you ever do any genealogy research where you're climbing around old courthouses and looking at old records,
no,
you may come across them. And there might be a survey where somebody's like going to buy land, and the land that he's buying, the property line goes along the creek up to a certain tree that's growing on the edge of the creek, and then extends in such a direction until it meets with a certain rock, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Well, apparently, a Belgian farmer, he was, he's doing his field, and there's a particular rock that's stuck in his field, and it's just in the way of his tractor, the way he needs to do to manage his field. So he moved the stone. He moved it 7.5 feet, and by doing so, apparently he made France smaller and Belgium bigger.
France was...
I guess the boundary between France and Belgium was officially defined by this stone that was in this farmer's field that he moved out of the way 7.5 feet.
He could have taken it... He should have taken it in like 7.5 miles.
I know.
I now own a huge chunk of France. Well, what about things like that are defined by rivers? And rivers
I know, because rivers change course.
Does that become the new part of the state? I mean, it happens in states, and I guess it happens in between Mexico and America. If the Rio Grande suddenly cuts in a different direction, does that become us?
Is the Rio Grande considered the boundary? I didn't know it was, but
I thought part of it was.
Parts of it might be. Yeah, that's one of the things.
No, maybe I'm wrong.
One of the,
not the Rio Grande.
Jobs
I don't know.
Modern surveyors is to go into a county or a township. Usually, it's within a township, and their job is to establish like markers, cornerstones, and stuff like that they set in the ground for the purpose of marking, and then they survey the boundaries and then section off the townships and establish markers there so that people who own land can describe the land relative to those various markers.
Yeah.
And part of the job of them is to always go back and remeasure and make sure that they are in the same place and that they haven't moved. And this land that I just recently bought, I went back and found the various markers along the back parts of the property, and they're just, those like steel, not like rebar, but kind of like rebar, except it's more like a T-beam or an I-beam shape, but maybe an inch thick or whatever. Anyway, that was kind of like hammered into the ground, and you could see where it was like, this is the one that's marked recently, and you could see another one like about a foot from it that's kind of old and rusted away, and it's like, oh wow, I could see like they had to renew it and put a new one in because the old one moved at some point, and the county surveyor, detected that and had to update it, and so it I guess establishing a fixed position for landmark or for land surveys and boundaries and stuff, that's a real problem, and it's it's not it's a labor intensive problem. I guess no matter where you live, it's a labor intensive problem to make sure that you always have that in place.
Right.
Okay, so if you find a strange rock in your field, you might want to talk to some local officials before you move it out of your way.
Or move it and then say, no, this has always been part of my yard. Yeah.
That's right.
Steal your neighbor's property.
Well, it's one thing to steal your neighbor's property, but if you're changing the boundary of an entire country.
Yeah. So are they going to recognize it? Is France going to recognize it?
I think they're going to move it back.
Oh, okay.
All right. Speaking of boundary disputes, this is another one of those I would just classify under the heading of pure Michigan. You remember the Pure Michigan ad campaign or whatever they had for a while? And if you drive into Michigan, I think it still says that on the signs, like where you're driving into the state, it says Pure Michigan.
No, I don't even know what you're talking about.
Okay, well, it was how states will have commercials that try to get you to come to that state for various vacations and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Michigan does theirs, and their tagline is Pure Michigan. Kind of like, because they've got all the lakes up there and everything, and there's this sense of purity and nature and stuff like that, and so Pure Michigan. And while Terry and I once were up there, she was driving back. She stopped at a gas station, needing to go to the bathroom off the interstate. She stopped at this gas station, and she said, "Do you have a restroom?" And he kind of looked uncomfortable. He said, "Well, there's an outhouse in the back. You can use that." And I wrote that up on on Facebook or whatever it is, and then I said underneath it, Pure Michigan. Now we have a story. A Michigan man, I'll just read you the headline. Michigan man builds poop wall after dispute with neighbor. I guess he had a dispute with his neighbor, and I don't know who won the dispute, but however it worked out, this is like farmland, and he decided, okay, I'm going to demark the boundary between our lands with a 250-foot line of manure, cow manure.
Okay.
So how would you like to write that survey report?
Yeah. So this
Or
is
you could be
a
the
neighbor
surveyor who has
angry
to
at
go
someone
update it.
who's like, fine, I can do whatever I want with my land. I'm going to line it with poop.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
What else could you say? Pure Michigan.
Yeah. These are two guys who just did not get along.
Well,
That's
you know,
the neighbor
what
from
poet,
hell.
What poet was it that made, you know, he had the poem about where the guy kept saying good walls make good neighbors?
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know if this counts as a good wall or
walls
not.
make good neighbors.
Yeah.
Bad walls make bad neighbors.
I guess.
Poop
Is
walls
this a
make
bad wall?
really bad neighbors.
And maybe bad neighbors make bad walls.
Bad neighbors make bad walls, and really bad neighbors make poop walls.
Make poop walls.
Jeez, that's terrible.
That is so weird.
That is a weird
Okay.
one.
All right. Last two. My next two are actually fishing ones. So that's a cool thing. So first, this is weird. Fisherman quits on the spot. When an absolute nightmare emerges from the water. So I guess he's fishing down in the Everglades. Can you guess what the nightmare is?
Alligator?
That's it. And they've got a video and everything. Alligator comes out of the water, and he's like, he's got a fish. You can see him. What's that?
Does it come after him, or?
Well, I don't know whether it was going to come. I guess it's during the breeding time.
Mm-hmm.
And so he, for whatever reason, the alligator came out, and the guy's like, I guess fortunately the alligator didn't come after him. Yeah, they see it. He's got the video, and he sees the alligator coming out, and he's like, forget this, I'm out of here. And I guess he must have been carrying a camcorder, or just like trying to hold on to his phone while it was, I don't know why. Here's the thing. I don't know. Let's say you're fishing, okay? You like to fish.
Yeah.
Would you ever just, like, while you're fishing, take out your phone and record your fishing?
If I had hooked
you
something
might take
and I
a
thought,
picture of the fish.
I've got a really... If someone was with me and I wanted to show, hey, I caught this fish, here, film me reeling it in. Because sometimes for bigger fish, it's a bit of a deal to actually land one. Once they hook on, it's like... Sometimes it takes an hour just to fight them in.
The fish can be a...
But I always wondered about that. When you're down there, if you're using test line that's like 200-pound test line, and you catch an alligator, what exactly happens there?
Well, he didn't catch the alligator. It just came out of the water while he was fishing.
Oh, it just came at him. Okay.
And
maybe
eventually,
he was just filming the water.
So it kind of followed him out into the woods a little bit, and he got a certain distance away and waited. Because I think a man can outrun an alligator. It's not like the alligator's going to catch up with you. But he kind of waited. The alligator didn't come, so he kind of peeked around back in the trail and saw that the alligator was heading back into the water. So he watched it back into the water, and then he's like, I'm out of here.
So what do you do if you catch an alligator, though?
If you actually
if you're fishing,
I have no idea.
And they eat a hook and it lodges into their system, and
that's why you gotta have a knife there, right? If you're fishing in the Everglades, you gotta have a knife to cut your line if you need to.
Yeah,
I guess
So what happens to that alligator? Does it? I wonder if
it just
dies,
it just went back in the water. Oh, if you catch one?
You got a giant hook in its mouth now. I
bet they have ways, because let's say you get a giant splinter in your arm. Your body has ways of getting rid of that.
Yeah. Well, I know if you catch fish and if you've lost the hook because it's down inside it and you cut it, the fish lives generally.
Really? Okay. Yeah, and the fish will find some way. Yeah, its body will either learn to deal with it or get rid of it somehow.
Yeah. I guess maybe alligators do the same thing, because I never hear about someone accidentally catching an alligator, but it's got to happen sometimes.
Yeah. Okay. Last one. So, this is kind of interesting. Something Jake would say is meta. So we're talking about fish. We were just talking about fishing, but you've heard of an anglerfish, right?
A what?
Anglerfish?
Like a fish that you angler for?
Well,
instead of...
No, because, well, you know what angling is.
When you go angling?
A style of fishing, right. Well, there are fish who live in the deep, deep ocean that part of their body emits a light.
Oh, okay.
And they lure other fish in and then eat them, and they're called anglerfish. And they're the ugly. I mean, they're super ugly, and weird looking. Well, one of them washed up on the shore.
Oh, neat.
In Crystal Cove State Park in Orange County, California, this past Friday. Cool. They've got pictures of it laying on the beach. It is really cool. The thing is, I thought these things lived so deep in the ocean that if they came out of the depth of the ocean, they exploded. But apparently not.
That's what I thought.
They've got a few pictures of it, and you can see the little thing with that has the parts that light up and got the big mouth.
How big
I don't see
is
anything. It? Well, that's the question. I don't see anything there that gives a sense of scale. Compare. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's like it is really cool to look. I mean, the picture itself is got he's got like 3 or 4 pictures, but it's got a good angle.
Okay.
And it's like and man, the teeth on this thing. It's like every bit as scary as you see in the
Yeah. And all the
online
drawings.
Pictures and stuff. The drawings.
They very rarely have real photos of them.
Yeah, but this one, and it's just laying there on the beach. It's like, wow, that is really neat.
Okay, we'll put all those pictures and videos in the show notes.
Yes, and in fact, I'm gonna go ahead and because I've got notes on the Bible verses and stuff too, so I'm gonna pop this into an email to you to add.
Okay. I cannot think of any stories for any of the nonsense news items because my wit is worn down after a hard week at work. So normally I'd have some funny things to say.
Almost.
I don't have anything
that
today.
I bring stuff up. You've got anecdotes and stories to tell.
Yeah, and I've got nothing today. I'm just worn out. Mentally.
You know what? That's okay. We've got over an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And I think this was a good show. I think we did a good job on the main topic of the show too.
Yeah.
So.
Well, folks, think about what we said, and as always,
circle the beads.
Keep praying, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, everyone.